Hello loves and welcome to today's video. I have been so blessed that NetGalley approved 3 of my requests for advanced copies for books that are releasing in April. So in this video, I'm going to be reading those April releases and letting you know which ones will be worth picking up when they release. The first one I'm going to be reading is The Last Session by Julia Bartz. I did really enjoy the writing retreat, which was Julia Bartz's debut, so I'm hoping that I like this one as well. I will give you an update once I'm halfway. So I have reached 53% of The Last Session, which is like chapter 33, which this book has such short chapters. Each chapter is like 4 to 7 pages long, which I love. I don't know why. My brain works better when there's frequent breaks. Our main character, Taya, is a social worker at this mental hospital, and there's this movie that she loved when she was a kid called Stargirl that she mostly loved because she looked a lot like the main character. And then she grows up and some Jane Doe comes into the hospital and oh, it was that actress who looks like her. I assume that will become a significant plot point at some point. The actress is picked up by her parents who aren't her parents, so her actual parents are looking for her. After doing some internet sleuthing based on a tattoo that the actress had, she believed that she might be being held at this like wellness retreat that helps you heal your past to be able to more easily get into relationships. So a lot of this book has been focusing on like the reason that people suck at relationships, which, hey, I feel called out. We have a variety of characters who are at this retreat with her. So there is Logan, I think his name is, who is a PI who is hired by the actress's parents. So he's also there undercover and she knows that he's there undercover. So it's the two of them now joining forces, and I think there's some romancy things going on with them. There's one woman who's been divorced for like 10 years who's trying to figure out what's going on with her life. There's Rajit, who invented an app and like was so focused on work that he's never gotten into a relationship. Dawn with an E, who I think is a sex addict. And then you have the two people who are like running this resort, Sol and Moon, who are like a couple. Althea's like mostly there to try and find. She also has some past trauma relating to her first sexual encounter. So this retreat is also like pulling up some unresolved trauma she has from her childhood relating to someone who bullied her and also her pastor. Definitely some very serious trigger warnings for this book. Grooming and degradation king, childhood abuse, very serious trigger warnings for this book. I am enjoying it so far. I was able to keep track of all of those characters. For me, that means that they're well written because I usually suck at keeping track of characters. I'm intrigued by this mystery of what's going on at this weird retreat. It's giving cult vibes, it's giving like crunchy pipeline vibes. That's things that really interest me both in fiction and in real life. So far my only hesitation is like how freaking heavy the backstory of this main character is. Like, I'm hoping now that we have that on the table, maybe we'll pivot more to a bit more of the mystery, because the past 20% of the book or so has focused a lot on the main character's backstory and not so much the mystery of this woman going missing. So we'll see where we go from there. This retreat where I am in the book, they just finished their first day where they kind of put all their trauma out into the open with some role playing. I will let you know when I'm done, but so far, so great. Hi, hello. I have finished The Last Session by Julia Bartz now. I'm about to figure out what my rating for it is. I will try to avoid spoilers for as long as possible, and then I will give you a warning when I'm figuring out my plot rating where the spoilers start, so you can skip over that. No spoilers for now. So the first half of the book is this social worker trying to go to this wellness retreat to track down her celebrity patient who looks suspiciously like her. The second half of the book really unpacks what exactly this cult beliefs are. That gets real weird like real weird. If you're wanting something weird, the second half of the book is where you'll thrive. If you prefer things a bit more grounded in reality, the first half of this book is where you'll be, and you'll hate the second half. Let's go through each of the compile categories and figure out what my rating is. So for characters, I'm going to give this a 4. I did really like all of the characters and the ways that they interacted. Taya and Catherine, they have a really interesting dynamic between like social worker and the celebrity. There's all of the characters who are participating in this retreat, and then all of the characters running this retreat. All of them had their own kind of weird backstories that we delve into, their own motivations for being part of the cult or part of this retreat. Atmosphere, I'm also going to give a 4 to. I did enjoy the atmosphere, so of course that would start right now. Hold on. The atmosphere I did really like. The story starts in New York City because that's where our main character works at this mental facility. Then we move to the retreat, which is in like, I think New Mexico, deep in the desert, and you are really isolated to that environment. So I enjoyed those atmospheres. The reason it doesn't get a 5 is just because I would have liked them to lean into the isolation of the environment just a little bit more, especially given that the character comes from New York and is used to being surrounded by people all of the time. So her going through what she's going through in the second half of this book, it could have played up her isolation from her support systems, especially given she is a therapist. Like, her support system, she got to know that that's important. So a 4, because I think it would have enhanced the tension of this book if we had played into the isolation of the atmosphere a little bit more. The writing style, I think I'm just gonna give a 3. I was waiting for a passage to blow me away, and I didn't really have any part of the writing that stuck out to me as being particularly good. It was easy to read, but it wasn't necessarily a standout to me. I'm going to put that as a 3, an average. Plot, oh god, okay. Plot. So I've gone over that this is about our social worker who went to this retreat to track down her celebrity patient. At this retreat, it brings up a lot of her childhood trauma and also the beliefs of the cult and how those two things intertwine. How did I feel about this plot? I think I'm gonna give the plot a 4 because I did enjoy the plot. I really enjoyed the cult element. I enjoyed unpacking of the trauma and all of those elements, how they intersected. It doesn't get a 5 though because the beliefs of the cult were so random and weird, but at the same time, having read books about real life cults before, it's not too unrealistic that they'd be batshit fucking insane in what they believe in. I will save more spoilers of the plot for after I finish the rest of my rating. Intrigue, I'm also going to give a 4 because I was intrigued to figure out what was going to go down with the cult's beliefs and how that interacted with the social worker. I was intrigued, so I'm going to give that a 4. Logic relationships, this is where we're going to struggle. I think this is only a 3. Because as I said, 1, the logic of what they believed, I had to suspend my disbelief. Again, I know that real life cults do believe in some insane stuff, but had to suspend my disbelief for how this kind of waffled on whether or not what was going on was real or not. And then on the relationship side, I think that the way that the characters interacted was a little obvious in guessing certain plot points. And then that puts my enjoyability at a 4 as well. I did enjoy this, but it's not going to be a favorite. So this ends up at a 3.75, so not bad. And now I'm going to go into the spoilers to discuss more specifically why I feel the way about the relationships and the plot. So if you don't want spoilers, I will put a timestamp and we will talk to you when I start their Monstrous Hearts. If you want spoilers, stick around. So, in the second half of the book, we get the reveal of what this random cult believes, which is that reincarnation is real and that everyone at this retreat, aside from like 2 people, is the reincarnation of this event that happened thousands of years ago, and that essentially Taya has to sacrifice herself to stop the pattern of abuse within all of them. And they kept doing these role-playing things where they'd like tap into what happened in dreams and stuff. And like I said, the book kind of hedges on whether it's going to be true or not, because you have Taya, who had these dreams for years, for decades before she even met these people, that are so perfectly aligned with all of this. So is that real? Or is it just them manipulating her? And they never really explained why Catherine and Taya, Catherine being the celebrity, looked so similar. I just think that it had to choose one or the other. It had to either choose that these people were making this bullshit up, or it had to choose that some of this was actually real. And I don't think I felt satisfied with how that was treated by the narrative, the hedging of the bets there. I called that Jonah was gonna betray her because just like literally he was the only character in the retreat who they played sympathetic towards. And then, oh wow, he's the one who betrays her. I'm so surprised. Saw that coming. Every single person at some point just like flip-flopped their loyalties, other than Sol and Moon, who are the people running the retreat. So I don't know, the relationship dynamics, it was just like, you can't trust anyone, and yeah, you're right to not trust anyone because everybody's gonna flip-flop loyalties constantly. It ends up at a 3.75. I think if you like novels where you're questioning whether or not what you have been told by the narrative is true or not, this might be something for you, especially if you like that, as it connects with like reincarnation or magic. And next I'm going to be reading Their Monstrous Hearts by Yeet Turhan, because the cover, pretty sick looking. I've reached 53% of Their Monstrous Hearts, so a little bit over halfway, and I'm not enjoying it very much so far. So main character is Ricardo, who is this like prodigy writer who won contests for his writing as a teenager, and now that he's an adult, he has a book deal and he has writer's block and can't write his first novel. His grandmother dies, and the like estate lawyer, whatever, comes and tracks him down in Paris and tells him to return to Milan to like close up the estate because he's inherited her butterfly collection and also the manor that she's in. It's the manor, it's kind of beat up and fallen apart. And then he finds this like manuscript that his grandmother wrote that is like the story of her life. The book from there flips between Ricardo in Milan in this house and then his grandmother's manuscript of her life. Very heavy on the manuscript of her life, while there's these undercurrents in the main current day timeline of the like servants and friends of his grandmother trying to track down a book because it contains a ritual. I have no idea what this ritual is. There's not even been any kind of hints to what it could be, other than there's butterflies that keep flying around. A lot of the manuscript has been like explaining the life cycle of butterflies. I took elementary school science. I know caterpillar, pupa, butterfly. I understand how that works. I don't need that explained to me. I don't need to be explained how snakes shed their skin. I don't need to be explained how the scales on the butterfly's wings are iridescent and show different colors in different lighting. A lot of this has been basic science. And then also the grandmother's like flashbacks to her life of like growing up in Turkey and then coming to Italy and marrying rich and joining high society. And I'm like, where is this going? When I pick up a book with the title Their Monstrous Hearts, I'm expecting something monstrous to happen, when so far it has just been his grandmother going to parties, complaining about the fact that her parents named her enough. Don't know where this is going. Don't know if I will like where it ends up based on what we've established so far, because the grandson seems a bit entitled. The grandmother we're getting the whole history of her life, and I don't know why I'm supposed to care, but I will see this through. I will finish it, and I hope that something actually monstrous happens in the last part. One of the things I'm finding kind of most annoying is that Ricardo, the grandson, keeps saying how well written his grandmother's manuscript is, how he can't believe that he didn't know that she could write this well, and he's supposed to be an author himself and very skilled as a writer, but I'm not seeing, I guess, what he's seeing in the quality of the writing, because I'm not drawn into it. I don't think it's anything notably written. Honestly, it keeps like jumping timelines back and forth and seems less cohesive than what he is implying it is. So I'm not enjoying that it's telling me how I'm supposed to feel about the manuscript when I'm not feeling that way about the manuscript, like at all. We got our first reference of a monster in their monstrous hearts, and it took 170 something pages to get there, when this book, according to my copy of it, is only 312. More than halfway of this book to get reference to a monster in a book called Their Monstrous Hearts. I get the slow burn, but that, you gotta foreshadow some of that stuff earlier on to keep people interested. Reading time for Their Monstrous Hearts. I finished it last night. Their Monstrous Heart is about our main character, Ricardo, who is in Paris, and he gets visited by this person who tells him that his grandmother has passed away, that he's inherited her estate, but most importantly, her butterfly collection. So he is an author who hasn't really written anything in a while. He's struggling with writer's block. He's on his last like $20, which confuses me because he buys things throughout the books despite not getting access to the inheritance yet and telling us he only has $20. And I'm like, where'd you get money for that coffee, my dude? So he goes to Milan, where this estate is, and when exploring the estate, he finds this manuscript of the story of his grandmother's life. All the while, the servants are acting kind of dodgy and looking for a ritual. For characters, I'm gonna give this a 2. So 80% of this book is not actually from Ricardo's perspective. It is this manuscript of his grandmother telling her life story. So any of the characters outside of the manuscript never really had enough screen time, page time, so to say, to build a sufficient investment in what happened to them or an understanding of their motivations. The grandmother, I feel like there were the opportunities to explore her backstory a lot more, but the backstory was just honestly filler to get to one specific plot point to me. So the grandmother grew up in Turkey and then left after having a disagreement with her parents, and then moved to Milan and ended up marrying rich. So being displaced as a person who was raised in an economically disadvantaged situation in Turkey to then being thrust into high society of Milan could have been an interesting topic to explore. But most of the times when it's like, oh yeah, I just went to a bunch of parties to talk to people, it's totally glossed over and not explored in a way that felt like it would have any depth to it. Again, all of that just felt like filler to get to enough of a page length to be able to do the twist at the end. Atmosphere, I'm gonna give a 3 to. There was potential in the atmosphere of, again, this disadvantaged woman going to all these high society parties, but I think I mentioned it in one of my updates that this book tells, not shows. So you are told that she goes to all these lavish parties in these designer gowns to rub elbows with all these people, but you never really, outside of one example, get to experience that. When you do experience that, she's on drugs the whole time, so she never really properly explores how she feels about it because she's obsessed with this angel that she finds, because that's where we get into plot. I don't really feel like the atmosphere was given an opportunity to shine, but I don't think that was as poorly written as some of the other aspects of the book. So I'm gonna give it a 3. Writing style, I am going to give a 2 to, though. As I said, it told instead of showed. It glossed over the parts of the plot that would have actually been interesting. The entire first 60% of the book feels like padding. The fact that the manuscript took up 80% of this book, you never sufficiently build up the tension that you would need to pull off the twist, because I'm not particularly invested what happens to Ricardo, honestly. I don't know this man from Adam, because all we experience of him is him taking the manuscript from one place to another, or like shoving it under the blanket so people don't know he has it. Outside of him complaining that he's a writer who received in advance and has to, I don't know, actually write and do his job, I don't think he had a personality. Pacing way too slow. It's so back-ended in terms of the weight of the plot. The characters don't have enough room to breathe, to develop, and it tells me how I'm supposed to feel about all of these things without actually investing any of the build-up to get me to feel that way. 2. I will give the plot a 3 because there is the twist at the end, which didn't necessarily surprise me, but I feel like with what we got in the first half of the book, I was surprised that the twist was kind of good. Intrigue is going to have to be a 2 though, because the first half of this book was so slow, I debated DNFing it. So yes, that plot twist was good, but I almost didn't get there because I was so bored in the first half. Nothing that was being told to me had any kind of emotional stake to it, and I was bored. Logic relationship. Allowing for that kind of mysticism, I will allow that the logic was there. The framework that was laid out for that plot twist did make sense. The relationships, on the other hand, is one relationship between Ricardo and one of the characters where we are meant to believe that this character chooses Ricardo over his own goddamn mother after meeting him 3 times. Because again, we spent 80% of the time in this manuscript back in the past, and 20% of the book on Ricardo bringing the manuscript places. So one of those places is where he meets this guy. Second time they meet, they make out, and then the third time, this guy chooses Ricardo over his own mother. I can suspend disbelief for like love at first sight in romance book. I could not believe that that would happen. That is going to end up at a 2. I think a 2, unfortunately, because I could not buy the relationships here. I couldn't buy the relationships between the grandmother and her grandson. I couldn't buy the relationship between the grandmother and her husband. Any of the servants. People didn't seem to interact much in this book, outside of like stabbing each other in the back, and that one romantic relationship that I'm supposed to believe happened. I'm like, could not. So my enjoyment of this is also going to be a 2. That leaves my rating at a 2.29, round down to 2.25. I wanted to love this because the book is so pretty. I thought the concept had promise. Unfortunately, the execution wasn't there for me. That is what my rating is and my thoughts without spoilers. If you would like to skip over the spoilers, I will see you again when I start Friends of the Museum. If you want to stay around for spoilers because you've either read it or you're not going to now based on what I've said. So the second half of Their Monstrous Hearts, we do actually finally get to the monstrous part of it, where the grandmother meets this little girl who has like iridescent skin. And it turns out that she is a monster and her tears cause immortality. And they cause like a little butterfly to come out of your mouth. And then when you die, that butterfly will reappear and restart your heart. Depending on the potency of the tears, could rejuvenate you. The guy that Ricardo ends up hooking up with was cured of motherfucking cancer by the grandmother and still somehow chooses Ricardo over Perihan. It turns out that this manuscript we've been reading this whole time is not for Ricardo to understand his grandmother's life. It turns out she's alive the whole time, which like, oh wow, you just spent 20% of the book telling me that the grandmother had the secret to immortality and you're supposed to be surprised she wasn't dead the whole time? Oh my god. Turns out that they found out how to like transfer life from one body to the other, so she is trying to take over her grandson's body, and she is successful. That's the way it ends. There was potential in that plot twist, but we didn't have any suspense or horror really leading up to it, outside of like the monster eating people a couple times, and I'm like, Monstrous gotta eat, you know? So, I don't know, this was a huge miss for me, and I'm really disappointed about that. I really wish that I had DNF'd this, because that plot twist did not make the rest of the book worth it. Those are the spoilery explanations of the plot, and I will now catch up with you guys when I am halfway through Friends of the Museum. Okay, I've hit the halfway point of Friends of the Museum, and I have some thoughts so far. So first of all, there are a lot of characters to keep track of, because this book is a singular day in this museum while they are trying to prepare and throw their annual gala, and it goes minute by minute. So you start the timestamps at like 5:30 a.m. and then 5:35 a.m., 5:37 a.m. as you go through the parallel happenings of this huge cast of characters. So many cast of characters that they have a dramatis personae at the beginning that I've actually had to refer to be like, how the fuck is Diane related to Jack? Or Dominic, I think is actually her husband or whatever. A lot of characters to keep track of, but I'm managing, which I've said before, keeping track of side characters is sometimes my flaw. I'm doing okay. The way this is written feels kind of unique to me. I haven't personally read anything like this before. First of all, there's no quotation marks. You just have to go with the flow and figure out what's dialogue and what's internal thought, which I struggled with in Blood Meridian. I haven't read any Sally Rooney, but I know she does that too. So if you like that kind of writing, this might be a book for you. But the rapid fire way that the dialogue is written is really reminding me of like an episode of House where they're walking down a hallway and just throwing out differential diagnoses. The curator of the museum is having a conversation with her assistant and is like, okay, is the ambassador from Japan on the way? Yes. Okay, remember I have to schmooze him. And then the assistant will pipe in, you also have that interview at 3:15. No, can we push that? Because I have to meet with the designer of this wing because the elevator's broken. Very rapid fire, which is kind of working for me. Plot-wise, you have this main structure, which is the employees of the museum prepping for this gala, while also everyone has professional and personal problems going on at the same time. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot packed into each page, which is making it a little bit of a slow read. I am quite a bit behind on what I would hoping to have read at this point. Fire way that it doesn't feel like it's long. It's very strange. So far I'm enjoying this. Obviously when you have such a large cast of characters with different things going on, there's going to be some you're enjoying more than others. Finding the curator really interesting. I'm finding the lawyer really interesting. There's a plot line that has to deal with pregnancy, and we'll have to see how they decide to resolve that one. So that one's kind of on the fence. I will let you know when I'm finished with this book. I finished Friends of the Museum by Heather McGowan, and I have some conflicting feelings about how I feel about this book. So, as an explanation, I saw this cover of the book, thought it looked cool. I read the synopsis. The synopsis explains that Diane is the curator of this museum and they're hosting this gala, and in the morning someone will be dead. Reading this, I'm like, oh cool, mystery novel. It's gonna be trying to figure out who amongst these people is the murderer, who amongst these people is gonna be the victim. That's not what this was, even remotely. This was more of a literary fiction looking at the personal and professional problems of the various people who work at this museum and how in this singular day all of the feelings they've been suppressing come to a head. The description only references Diane, but Diane is only one of like 7 main characters that we follow throughout this book. Starting the rating with character, I gave 5 for the characters because I think that given the large range of people that we had in this book, I liked basically all of them. There's only maybe like one character whose story I was just not gelling with, but I think that all of the characters were so well written in doing their jobs, trying to get this gala to run, while also having personal thing going on in their life. I think this is the type of book where you're gonna see yourself in one of the characters. Everyone is going to be able to see themselves in one of these characters because of how diverse the perspectives were, not necessarily just in the way of race and gender, but in the way that they view the world. So I think 5 out of 5 for characters. This was a really good cast of characters who were written really well. Atmosphere I gave a 4 to. So the main setting is this museum. You do have a couple other locations throughout New York that you go to, but the majority of this action happens in the museum. I think that the way that this book was written really contributed to having a good atmosphere. It really did feel like all of these people were in the same building. For example, there are times where like Catherine, one of the characters, is listening to Rapper's Delight in her office full blast and is having a reflective moment about trying to drown things out and not think. And then the scene transitions to the security guard who's walking past the hall and is like, she listening to this song on repeat again? It's gonna be stuck in my head. And then we go into the security guard, Shay, reflecting on her work in this museum based on the song blasting. So it really set a good concept of space and the interconnectedness of this museum. Like you could almost picture the exact layout of the museum in your head because of the way the scenes transitioned and made them feel so connected. Definitely a 4 for atmosphere. And that leading into the writing style, I also gave that a 4. I thought that the way that the writing style went over a 24-hour period and was time-stamped was really such an interesting format for me. I do wish it had had quotation marks. I know that's kind of an artsy literary thing that I think Sally Rooney does. For me, just put the proper punctuation in, please. But this book did just have such a flow to it as we transition between all of these different perspectives. The one thing I would have liked is just next to the timestamp, tell me whose perspective I'm in, because sometimes it would take me a paragraph or two to be like, who's this? Okay, right, that guy. Given how many perspectives we switched through and the speed at which a lot of the dialogue is happening, I was impressed that I was able to keep a lot of this straight, and I think that's a credit to the writing. So 4. Plot did end up at a 3, and I will say that's more because of what this book is and the expectations I had for it. As I mentioned, I went into this expecting it to be a mystery thriller because of that blurb line where it's like, and in the morning, someone's dead. That was true. That is a thing that happened. But that was so inconsequential to the overall arc of this book. This book was a character study. This was looking at the different ways that people are unsatisfied in their lives and try to make drastic changes to improve their lives. I think that meant that the plot was bare minimum, except for like one thing at the very end, which I did enjoy. That one plot point at the very end was so good. The plot, the gala, the fact that someone dies is all background to the character study. So for me, as someone who reads a lot more genre fiction, a fantasy, a sci-fi, a horror, there's not enough plot in this book. But that's because this isn't a plot-focused book. So it's a 3, but understanding what this book was. Intrigue is also a 3 because while this book feels fast in the format and the way that it's written, it was a little slow in the pacing as to the events that are happening in this book. Because we have such a large cast of characters, it is going to be a case, and this is how I relate to books with large casts of characters, where there are going to be the plots that I care about and the plots that I don't care about. And I think I'm at a 3 as to how many I cared about. I was interested in Diane's perspective. I was interested in Catherine's perspective. I was interested in, I think, Clive, but Shay I didn't care very much for. Benjamin I didn't care very much for. So we end up kind of 50-50. Iona annoyed me. So we're at a 3 based on the perspectives that I liked and the perspectives that I didn't like, because when it was a perspective I didn't like, I wasn't intrigued. I didn't care what happened to some of the people, and that's just, again, a nature of what this book was that I'm gonna be more invested in some than others. Logic relationships I gave a 4 to. Because this is a character study, this is a lot more focused on relationships, so not so much on the logic. The logic is that they're throwing a gala at a museum, which is something that museums do. That makes sense. There's not a huge leap of logic or a magic system we're assessing here. So on the strength of the relationships, a lot of the personal conflicts that these people were experiencing, and even some of the professional conflicts, were related to their relationships with each other or with the side characters. So I think a lot of the relationships were very realistically written in that level of insecurity that people have in their relationships, how they read into the motivations of others. So the relationships were very realistically written, so I gave that a 4. My enjoyment, however, does get a 3 because this is not the book for me based on what it is. I'm not a huge fan of character studies. I prefer a more plot-driven narrative, and this book was so long to not have an actual, war between two rival mystical creatures, or to have someone murdering people up in here. So it is a 3 for me, but that's a me problem. I think this book is really good for someone who is a fan of, say, Anxious People by Frederick Bachman, or I've never read a Sally Rooney, but I feel like people who like the more reflective, this is how people interact with each other in society type of books will like this. Ends up at a 3.75 as well, and that ends up tied with the last session being more of my genre, and this one being really well written and a really good book for someone else. So that is my rating without spoilers. I only really have one spoilery thing that I want to talk about, so I will start that now, and you can jump forward if you want my final wrap-up thoughts. But for this book, my favorite scene is towards the end, and it's when Benjamin's brother, who is in this art collective, hijacks the gala with an anti-capitalist presentation, and I loved that. You spend hundreds of pages with the curator trying to suck up to all of these donors, to the security guard being like, we know that's a forgery, why are we still keeping it there, and people being like, above your pay grade, to then have all of these people that they were schmoozing be called out for their creepy behavior, for their disregard of the poor. Oh, it was fun. I love an Eat the Rich narrative, and I got little taste of it. It was just so satisfying after spending all of that time with Diane losing her mind over trying to get all these sponsors. So that is my exploration of 3 different releases that are coming out next month. I think the last session was really good if you want a culty mystery. I unfortunately cannot recommend their Monstrous Hearts based on my experience of it, but I would recommend Friends of the Museum if you are someone who likes a bit more of a character study. If you made it to the end of this video, let me know in the comments down below if there's any April, May releases that you're looking forward to, or leave the palette emoji for our artists in Friends of the Museum. If you enjoyed, like and consider subscribing so you don't miss what I'm reading in the future. Thank you so much to NetGalley for providing me the arcs of these books for review purposes, and thank you for watching and have a great day.